Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the shooting incident involving James Brennand and Eric Cantu? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background in this case, including the timeline of the incident. Then I'll offer my analysis. This case takes place in San Antonio, Texas, on October 2, 2022. It involves a San Antonio police officer named James Brennand. He had only been on the force for 7 months and was still on probation. At about 10:42 p.m., James responded to a call about a disturbance at a McDonald's restaurant at 11700 Blanco Road. The officer exited his vehicle and was gathering information from witnesses when he noticed a car in the parking lot that looked familiar. A day earlier, James had tried to pull over a car that was running license plates which did not match the vehicle, indicating that perhaps the car had been liberated from its rightful owner. The car did not stop for James, rather it was driven away in violation of the law. The case of this vehicle, which evaded James, was unrelated to the disturbance call he was responding to at McDonald's. Apparently, James was just giving up on the disturbance call altogether and just chasing this new shiny thing in the parking lot that just caught his attention. James probably believed that the vehicle he noticed in the parking lot was the vehicle that evaded him, but at the time of making this video, it's not clear if the vehicles were the same. Either way, James used his radio to call for backup and approached the car on foot without waiting for any officers to arrive. The vehicle was occupied by a 17-year-old named Eric Cantu. He was sitting in the driver's seat. In addition, a 17-year-old female was in the passenger seat. Based on Eric's parking skills, it seems possible that he may not have been a recipient of the Best Driver of the Year award. After James reached the vehicle, he abruptly opened the driver's side door with his left hand and said, "Get out of the car." He did not identify himself as a police officer. Eric had what appeared to be a hamburger and a cell phone on his lap. Eric replied with the word, "What?" and looked over his left shoulder at James. Eric immediately shifted his vehicle into reverse and backed out of the space as he turned the wheel to the left. At this time, the car door was still open and James was in the path of the door as the car moved backward. James was struck by the door, but it did not appear to be severe. It was like the door bumped him as the car backed out of the space. It didn't knock James down or anything like that. Right after the door made contact with him, James drew his pistol, pointed it at the car that Eric was driving, and fired 5 times. Eric put the car in drive, turned the wheel to the right, and drove away. James fired 5 more times at the car. He then chased the vehicle on foot. He was not successful in catching up with it, at least not what we see from the body camera video. The vehicle Eric was driving was found 1 block away. By this point, both Eric and his passenger had exited the vehicle. Eric had been shot several times and was taken to the hospital. His passenger was not harmed. No firearms were found in the vehicle he was driving. Eric was charged with evading detention in a vehicle and assault on a police officer. Later, the charges against him were dismissed by the district attorney out of compassion because Eric was in critical condition. Evidently, when somebody is charged with a crime in San Antonio, their family members are restricted as to how much time they can spend with him. So the district attorney dismissed the charges so the family could spend more time with Eric. In theory, the charges could be refiled later. James Brennand was fired a few days after the shooting for violating the practice, training, and procedures of the San Antonio Police Department. The shooting incident will be referred to the district attorney to determine if criminal charges against James Brennand are warranted. At the time of making this video, Eric is still in the hospital and will have to undergo several major surgeries. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts in a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. When James noticed the vehicle Eric was driving in the parking lot, how did he know it was the same car that evaded him the day before? It may surprise James to learn that manufacturers build many vehicles of the same model and in the same color every year. Item number 2, how did James know that even if it was the same car, the driver of the vehicle would be the same person who was driving the day before? James may not have been aware, but the driver's seat of a motor vehicle can accommodate different human beings. The identity of the driver changes based on the identity of the human who is in the seat at any given time. This is actually fairly common. Most people understand that different people can drive a car. There are several scenarios that are possible in this particular case. Perhaps the car was stolen, but the rightful owner regained possession and was now driving it. Maybe the vehicle had never been stolen at all, and the rightful owner was illegally using the wrong license plates to get around paying for registration. There are many alternatives to the driver remaining the same from one day to the next. Item number 3, what was it about this scenario that made James feel like his life was in danger? One could argue that the door striking the officer put him in danger, and perhaps Eric could have run him over if the officer did not act. A vehicle can be a deadly weapon. The problem for the officer is this: to the extent that he was in actual danger, he put himself in that danger. He failed to identify himself as a police officer, and he knew the car was running, yet he opened the door so that if the car backed up, the door would hit him. Now, I realize that Eric was holding a hamburger. Maybe James felt threatened by this. I wonder what made James believe the burger was dangerous. Was it one of those assault burgers? Maybe a fully automatic Big Mac or a McDouble barrel shotgun? Perhaps it was one of those ghost burgers I've heard so much about. Like an officer could examine that burger all they wanted, and they're not going to find a serial number. Now, one could argue that Eric did not have a concealed burger permit, but the burger was in plain sight, so there's no way anyone is going to buy that argument. Of course, the threat may not have been limited to only the burger itself. Perhaps this burger was fitted with a large-capacity magazine of French fries. It's all fun and games until an officer is on the ground, covered in fries. Or maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way. What if the burger was a hostage and James was trying to rescue it the whole time along? The burger did not try to escape because it had Stockholm Syndrome. McDonald's could call this the Patty Hearst Quarter Pounder. It would not be a problem if James could not differentiate a firearm from a burger if James had drawn a burger and fired. But he was using an actual firearm. Item number 4, if the charges are refiled against Eric, should Eric be found guilty? Both charges are predicated on the idea that Eric understood that James was a police officer. But I'm not sure that he did. For all Eric knew, James was a carjacker because he did not identify himself. I think there is a reasonable doubt in this case, and it was supplied by James Brennand. Item number 5, if James Brennand is charged with a crime, should he be found guilty? In my opinion, James probably did commit some type of crime. He attempted to murder Eric and put the passenger in danger. I'm thinking something like attempted manslaughter. At the very least, this would be reckless endangerment. If James suspected that the vehicle Eric was driving was stolen, he could have simply waited for backup. There was no need to jump the gun, or, to phrase it like James would understand, jump the burger. Item number 6, what was James Brennand thinking? His behavior does not seem to make much sense. I remember something that happened years ago during a meeting that I was attending that may enhance this analysis. I'll go through that story, then talk about my theory with the incident in San Antonio. Some of the details have been changed to protect the innocent. One time I was attending a meeting with a few professionals from various backgrounds, like mental health counselors, nonprofit administrators, and community advocates. A few of the people at the meeting were on their second career. Their first career was in law enforcement. During one of the breaks, one of the administrators told a story to everybody that was inspired by an experience she had with the police. I will call this individual Jane. One night, Jane was on a 2-lane road driving in excess of the posted speed limit. This is something that, evidently, she did regularly. She was in a relatively nondescript 4-door sedan. There were trees on both sides of the road. Coming the other way from Jane was a police officer. When the officer passed Jane, she looked in a rearview mirror and saw the emergency lights come on and the car move into the shoulder and then turn left, as if the officer was making a U-turn. Just as this was happening, the road was curving to the right, meaning that the police officer would briefly lose visual contact with Jane's car. Jane, of course, believed that she was being pulled over, and she did not want another ticket. She saw an entrance to a neighborhood on the right. Therefore, she slammed on the brakes and turned right into the entrance. She quickly stopped, shifted her car into park, and lifted her foot off the brake. The police officer drove right by. As Jane was sitting in her vehicle, she started to question her judgment. She thought maybe she was being paranoid and the police officer was never trying to pull her over. Rather, the officer was just responding to a call that just happened to come in at that moment. She turned her vehicle around and went back to the road with the intent of continuing on her trip, only to find that the officer had turned around after realizing what she had done. I imagine the officer rounding that turn and seeing the road out in front of him and realizing there was no car there. He had figured out that there was no way Jane's car was fast enough to be out of visual range by that point, so he turned around. Jane was arrested by this police officer, but wisely she chose not to talk to him. The police could not prove that she was deliberately evading the traffic stop, and the charges were eventually dismissed, although she was still cited for speeding. As Jane was telling the story, one of the former police officers in the meeting, who is now a community advocate, was getting visibly upset. I will refer to him as Bob. At one point, I could see Bob's hand shaking and his face was turning red. I don't know if anyone else noticed or understood why he was reacting this way, but I had a feeling that I knew what was going on. Later, when the meeting was over and only a few people were left in the room, Jane was not one of them, Bob confirmed my suspicions when he explained his feelings. He was furious that Jane had tried to escape being pulled over. Now, of course, Bob wasn't the same officer who pulled Jane over, but he was sympathizing with that officer's experience. He was feeling the same feelings he thought the officer had, which were frustration and rage. He was thinking to himself, how dare Jane disrespect the authority of the police? It was personal to Bob. It wasn't just about Jane trying to beat a ticket. Rather, she was insulting the honor and integrity of that unnamed officer. Bob never attended another meeting with Jane. That's how deep his anger was. Connecting back to the story in San Antonio, Texas, I think what happened with Bob is what happened with James. I think that James Brennand felt disrespected and insulted by whoever it was who fled from him the previous day. He wanted revenge. It was payback time when he saw that vehicle in the McDonald's parking lot. When he grabbed the handle of the car that Eric was driving and opened that door, it was only going to end with James being dominant and victorious. He was not going to be humiliated for a second time. When Eric shifted the car in reverse and backed up, that was it for James. He wasn't going to tolerate Eric remaining alive. It was not a life and death situation, but James was reacting as if it was. Such was the intensity and persistence of his rage. Now moving to my final thoughts. Even though I believe that James was guilty and Eric was not guilty in this incident, Eric was unwise to flee from the police, and he probably did realize that James Brennand was a police officer. Eric probably did not understand an officer's capacity to take things personally and to hold on to a grudge. Those are my thoughts on the shooting incident in San Antonio involving James Brennand and Eric Cantu. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be as intriguing as the old phrase, never bring a burger to a gunfight. Thanks for watching.